In the lush heart of Aquitaine, where vineyards spilled across rolling hills and troubadours strummed songs of courtly love, a child was born who would one day shake the thrones of Europe. Her name? Eleanor. Born around the year 1122, under stars that seemed to shimmer with premonition, she was the daughter of William X, Duke of Aquitaine, and Eleanor of Châtellerault, a union of prestige and poetic blood. But Eleanor was no ordinary noble child, tucked away in a cold stone keep. No, her world pulsed with life. The court of Aquitaine was a symphony of color and culture, where poets dined beside knights, and the scent of ink and parchment mingled with that of honeysuckle and steel. It was a place where stories reigned as fiercely as kings. William X, a man of vision and volatile pride, ensured his daughter's mind was as sharp as any blade. She was taught Latin not as a dead language, but as a key to ancient wisdom. She studied mathematics not for sums, but to read the rhythm of the stars. And astronomy? That was her window into the heavens, where destiny, perhaps, had already written her name among constellations. While other girls were taught to sew and smile, Eleanor devoured the classics and debated philosophy. She listened not just with ears, but with ambition. Her tutors whispered of Cicero, of Boethius, of Plato, and she drank their words like wine from a golden cup. And in the great halls of Poitiers, beneath banners soaked in history, the young Duchess-in-waiting learned not just how to rule, but how to outshine even the kings who would one day try to tame her. Death often arrives with a crown in its wake. In 1137, the Duke of Aquitaine, William X, breathed his last, leaving not just a title behind, but a storm. At just 15, Eleanor became the Duchess of Aquitaine, ruling over lands richer and larger than those of the French king himself. Vineyards, forests, castles, trade routes, her domain stretched from the Loire to the Pyrenees, a kingdom in all but name. And suddenly, every prince in Christendom wanted her hand. But William had made his choice before death claimed him. He placed his daughter under the protection of King Louis VI of France. The old king, half collapsing under the weight of his own body, saw an opportunity wrapped in silk and fire. Within months, he married Eleanor off to his son, the young, pious Louis VI. Ah, Louis, a monk in a prince's robes, dragged from cloister to crown after his elder brother's untimely death. Where Eleanor burned bright like a comet, Louis flickered like a candle in a cathedral, quiet, devout, unsure of the world beyond scripture. And yet, in July of 1137, beneath vaulted ceilings and murmuring priests, they were wed. But this was no fairy tale. This was politics inked in blood and land. The marriage tied Aquitaine to the French crown, not by conquest, but by union. Overnight, Louis ruled not just France, but her fertile southern reaches as well. And Eleanor, she became Queen of France. Still, not all queens are content behind gilded walls. Beneath her jeweled veil, Eleanor knew exactly what she had given and what she intended to keep. Queens don't often ride into war. But Eleanor of Aquitaine wasn't born for the usual. In 1147, the fires of holy war burned once more. The Pope had called for a second crusade, and Louis VII, righteous to a fault, answered. Yet he would not march to Jerusalem alone. Eleanor, Queen of France and Duchess in her own right, would ride beside him, armor gleaming, banner unfurled, flanked by a company of Aquitanian knights, as proud and defiant as their mistress. It was a sight that stirred awe and disbelief. A queen on crusade, leading warriors, some whispered of Joan of Arc before her time. Others, more fearful, saw omens in her boldness. But Eleanor cared little for whispers. Across the Mediterranean they sailed, into the heat and dust of the east, into lands where mirages danced on the horizon, and trust could wither faster than a desert bloom. The crusade, intended as a holy cause, soon tangled itself in chaos. Commanders argued, alliances cracked, and the sun-scorched ground drank more French blood than Saracen. And in the middle of it all, Eleanor. She clashed openly with Louis over tactics. Where he hesitated, she pushed. Where he sought the will of God, she read the will of men. But it wasn't just military friction that sparked tension. It was Raymond of Poitiers, Prince of Antioch, her uncle, charismatic, cunning, and far too charming for Louis's liking. The court buzzed with speculation as Eleanor spent more and more time at his side, speaking in hushed tones, laughing beneath lanterns as strategy maps lay forgotten. Louis bristled. Whether it was jealousy, fear of betrayal, or simply the weight of being outshone, he snapped. He demanded Eleanor leave Antioch and march with him toward Jerusalem. She refused, a queen refusing her king in the heart of a crusade, scandalous, but Louis would not be defied. He forced her to follow him, tearing her away from the court of Antioch, from Raymond, and from whatever might have truly passed between them. By the time they limped back to France in 1149, the crusade had failed. So had the marriage. What had begun in silk and scripture now cracked under heat and steel. The road back from the Holy Land was long, but the distance between Eleanor and Louis had already stretched beyond repair. What war hadn't broken, silence did. They returned to France not as lovers, not even as allies, but as shadows in the same procession, strangers bound by a crumbling throne. By 1152, the curtain finally fell. The church, ever willing to cloak scandal in sanctity, declared the marriage void. Consanguinity, they said, too closely related by blood, as if that hadn't been known since the altar. But everyone understood the truth. Eleanor and Louis had shared a crown, not a future, and just like that, she was free. But Eleanor was never one to linger in the ruins of yesterday. While others mourned or schemed, she moved, swift as a hawk in flight. Her lands were hers again, Aquitaine, Poitou, the sprawling domains that kings would kill to hold. And sure enough, they tried. Suitors poured in like wolves drawn to scent. Some proposed, some plotted. 2 barons even tried to abduct her on the road. They failed, because Eleanor had already chosen. Enter Henry Plantagenet. Fiery, ruthless, brilliant, 11 years her junior and hungry for a throne. The moment their paths crossed, it wasn't courtship, it was collision. Sparks, storm, strategy. She saw in him not just a lover or a king-to-be, but a partner cut from the same iron. Within 8 weeks of her annulment, Eleanor married Henry in a quiet, calculated ceremony. No feast, no fanfare, just power consolidated. And 2 years later, in 1154, Henry became King of England. Eleanor, once Queen of France, now wore a second crown, one heavier, darker, and far more dangerous. Not many women could command one kingdom. She now had ties to 3, and the game had only just begun. To most, a queen's duty ends at the throne. But Eleanor, hers began in the cradle. As Queen of England, Eleanor of Aquitaine didn't just wear the crown, she forged dynasties. Between the cold stones of English castles and the sun-washed halls of Poitiers, she bore 8 children. Not delicate ornaments of lineage, but heirs bred for conquest, diplomacy, and war. Among them were 2 names that would thunder through history like hoofbeats over stone. Richard, her golden lion. Fierce in battle, noble in bearing, a warrior king whose sword carved his legend into the Holy Land. John, her youngest, shadowed by his brother's glory, yet destined to wear the crown. The same John who would clash with barons, who would seal the Magna Carta in trembling hands. But they were not alone. Eleanor's brood spread across Europe like wildfire, marrying into royal houses, claiming lands, stirring wars. Her blood ran through the veins of empires. Her daughters became queens and duchesses, her sons kings and rebels. Each carried a spark of her flame, restless, brilliant, and unpredictable. Yet behind the lineage was a mother who knew the Game of Thrones better than any man alive. She didn't just raise kings, she trained them, with parchment and steel, with whispers and warnings, with lullabies sung in Latin and lessons etched in fire. And when they defied her, as sons do, she didn't shrink. She fought, even against Henry, even against the king she had once chosen. Eleanor would rebel, plot, and sacrifice to ensure her children's place atop the world's bloody chessboard. She was not just a mother. She was the architect of a royal legacy so vast it would echo through centuries. Power unshared is power threatened. And in the gilded shadows of the Angevin court, where whispers traveled faster than ravens, love gave way to war. By the 1170s, the union between Eleanor and Henry II had soured into something sharp-edged and cold. Once bound by ambition and desire, they now stood on opposite ends of the chessboard, 2 monarchs too large to kneel, even for each other. Henry, ever restless, had taken lovers. The most notorious was Rosamund Clifford, the fair Rosamund, they called her, though Eleanor may have chosen other words. Rumors swirled of secret gardens, of poison, of vengeance masked in perfume. But betrayal wasn't only of the heart, it was of power. Henry held dominion over lands Eleanor had once ruled alone. Her sons, Richard, Geoffrey, and the ever-ambitious Henry the Young King, chafed under their father's iron grip. And Eleanor? She saw in them not just sons, but keys to the prison her marriage had become. In 1173, she made her move. Eleanor, Queen, Duchess, Mother of Kings, threw her weight behind a rebellion against her own husband. It was audacious, treasonous, glorious. Her sons rose in arms, and across England and Normandy, banners were raised not for their father, but against him. But the lion still had claws. The rebellion failed, the sons were defeated, and Eleanor was captured. No public trial, no execution, just silence. Henry had his queen locked away, first in England, then moved from castle to castle like a secret too dangerous to speak aloud. No throne, no court, no children at her side. For 16 long years, the greatest queen of her age was a prisoner in her own realm, yet her spirit did not break. It watched, it waited, like a storm held behind stone, biding its time. Because Eleanor had learned something long ago in the halls of Aquitaine, even the fiercest lioness can wait in the tall grass until it's time to strike again. The lion was dead. In 1189, after decades of fire and fury, Henry II drew his last breath, broken by rebellion and grief. And from the ashes of his reign, a new king rose, Richard the Lionheart, Eleanor's golden son. And his first act, he opened her cage. After 16 long years in confinement, Eleanor of Aquitaine, now well into her 60s, stepped once more into the light. But age had not withered her, nor had silence dulled her mind. She emerged not as a relic, but as a queen reborn. And the realm, in turmoil and transition, turned to her. Richard was no stay-at-home king. In 1190, driven by chivalry, piety, and a thirst for glory, he departed for the Holy Land to lead the Third Crusade. But empires do not pause when kings vanish over the sea. England remained, bleeding, restless, and vulnerable. So Richard left the crown in the hands of the only ruler he trusted, his mother. Eleanor became regent of England, ruling in her son's name with the iron will of a monarch who had once walked beside emperors, outmaneuvered barons, and defied popes. She journeyed across the realm, shoring up alliances, collecting taxes, crushing rebellion. With one hand, she steadied the throne, and with the other, she held back her youngest son, John, ever ambitious, ever lurking, already hungry for the crown not yet his. She was not merely keeping a seat warm, she was commanding from the heart of the storm. When Richard was captured and held for ransom in 1192, Eleanor, now nearing 70, did not falter. She crossed the Alps in winter, negotiating his release, raising the enormous sum demanded for his freedom. Through snow, court intrigue, and the laughter of enemies, she marched with the resolve of a mother and the precision of a general. And when Richard finally returned, it was not to a kingdom in ruin, but to one intact, thanks to the woman who had once ruled Aquitaine, France, and England by marriage, and now by sheer force of will. But even lions must sleep. As the century turned, Eleanor withdrew, not in defeat, but in choice. She retired to the Abbey of Fontevraud, a sacred place nestled in the quiet hills of Anjou. There, among candlelit cloisters and the whispers of prayer, she prepared for her final rest. She passed in 1204, at the age of 82. They laid her to rest beside the two men who had defined her legend, Henry VI, the husband turned captor, and Richard, the son who had lit battlefields ablaze. But in death as in life, Eleanor remained sovereign, carved in stone with a book in her hands, not a cross, a queen of mind and might. And so ended the life of the woman who had shaped empires, birthed legends, and outlasted kings. But even now, in the quiet halls of Fontevraud, when the wind rustles through the ivy and candles flicker in empty chapels, you might still hear her whisper, "The lioness never truly sleeps."